Hi there. Start again. I'll start again, okay? Hi there. My name is Stuart Ross. I am a writer in Cobourg, Ontario. Cobourg is about an hour and a half east of Toronto, right on Lake Ontario. And I'm actually sitting my car now on this pier we have. And I was going to show you the lake, but the lake is completely frozen over. This is actually the part of the lake where people come and dock their boats in the summer and in the spring. But as you can see, everything is totally covered in snow and ice. That's Lake Ontario over there. There's a horrible nuclear plant in the distance. You can't see it from here, but it's in a neighboring town. This is where sort of rich people live in Cobourg, some of them anyways, some of them who have summer homes. They live in these condos on the waterfront. But not everyone here is rich, as Lily and I can attest to. So, I am just going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to go out into the park behind me there, and I'm going to read you some poetry. So I'm a poet. I'm a fiction writer. I write rants. I'm working with one artist on some kind of amalgamation of text and visual art, and I'm working with another on what we hope will be some kind of little graphic novel or comic zine or something. Anyway, so I work in a lot of different literary genres. But today, for the purposes of this Rocking the Page, I am going to... My dog's licking my hand as we talk here. I am going to be a poet. And as I say, I'm going to read you some poems. And I'll just tell you a little bit about my history. I started writing when I was about 10, 11 years old. Really, really bad rhyming poems. And they were just terrible. And as I got into my teens, I started reading a lot more and finding a lot of writers whose work I really admired, mostly American and Canadian writers, but also writers in translation from Latin America and Germany and Italy. And reading all that stuff really improved my own writing and showed me different things that were possible in poetry. So I was first published when I was 16 by a company that was then called Books by Kids, and they published books by kids for kids. And they published a couple of poets and me in one book called The Thing in Exile, which had about a dozen poems by each of us. And as I got into my late teens, I started self-publishing little pamphlets of my poetry. And then I got more and more serious and meeting lots and lots more writers and going to the occasional workshop and becoming aware of literary magazines and all sorts of literary presses. And in my 20s, I started standing out on Yonge Street, which is the main street in Toronto. I would stand there with a sign around my neck saying something like, "Writer going to hell, buy my book," or "A lousy Canadian poet, buy my books." And I sold over the decade of the 1980s about 7,000 of my poetry and fiction chapbooks standing out in the street that way. And into my 30s, I started getting published by bigger publishers. Not big publishers, but bigger small publishers. Little books of poetry and fiction, short novels, and that sort of thing. And now I do both of those things. I publish little leaflets and pamphlets of my work, and I also get books published by bigger literary presses. And specifically about poetry, I will tell you that my philosophy is that poetry is an adventure. It's a laboratory. It's a factory where you can try all sorts of crazy, crazy things, because you can really do anything you want in poetry. There aren't any rules. And so you'll notice from the poems that I'm going to read you in a little while that each of them is very, very different from one another. And you might even say these poems don't all sound like they're written by the same author, but that doesn't bother me, because I think if you're writing, one of the most exciting things to do is try out all sorts of different experiments, all sorts of different approaches to writing. And that's what I try to reflect in my own work, in my books. So I think that's probably all I'm going to tell you right now. And you can hear some of my poems in just a moment when I relocate over there. But first I'm going to walk my dog, because I think she really needs to use the park. Okay, see you soon. Okay, first poem I'm going to read you is called Road Trip, Southern Ontario, 1999. A little bit of background on that. My father died in 2001. And I got to thinking of the times that he and I spent together. We'd spent a lot of time, the whole family together, but my dad and I didn't spend a lot of time, just the two of us. But I remembered that a couple of years earlier, and I'm so glad it happened, he and I just took a road trip. We decided to drive and see where we ended up. This poem mentions that lake that's behind me, so that's why I thought it would be a nice one to read. It's also maybe one of the most straightforward poems of the poems I'm going to read to you today. Certainly it's the most autobiographical. Road trip Southern Ontario, 1999. We drive and drive until we hit a lake. At the edge of the lake is a cairn. The plaque reads, "They drove and drove until they hit a lake." My father and I trade glances. A cold breeze ruffles his thin gray hair. Behind us, the car idles, the doors hanging open. I shiver. He locks my head in the crook of his arm. I place my feet on his, and he walks, giant-like, towards the water, carrying me with him. "Take me to your planet," I say. In the car again, we are silent. The sports announcer says something about sports. If we had been born a century earlier and in Paris, perhaps my father and I would be walking our turtles along the boulevard, being silent in French. In 2 years, my father will be dead. The car will be mine. Children will crack the windshield, my feet will touch the ground. Oh, also, I'll have one brother fewer. I'll have one brother. When the snow falls, I will catch it and put it back. That's interesting. As I was reading that, I realized something I'm not sure I realized before, is that obviously I was in my late 30s when this poem took place, or when my dad and I did that drive, but I transported myself in the poem to when I was a child, when I'd, grab one of his legs and stand on his feet, and he'd walk around lurching about like a monster. So I guess I was sort of putting together all of my ages and talking about my relationship with my dad. So that was Road Trip Southern Ontario, 1999. This poem is very, very different. It's called Another Poem After Yu Jian. Now, Yu Jian is a Chinese poet. I can't read Chinese, but I had a book of his poetry in Chinese, and I thought, I'll see what happens if I try to translate this without knowing the language, without even being able to know what the alphabet is, or even how words are pronounced. So this is what I came up with. Sort of guessing, maybe, what those Chinese characters look like they mean. Another poem after Yu Jian. He's berserk. He throws his computer into the tree. Don Quixote slices open the box. Everybody on Earth balances planks on their heads. The Navy haircut makes him look conventional around the dynamite. But his caged bird dies. He runs and runs and runs. He runs into the alligator's jaw. Seriously, an eye for an eye. You cannot hide in a tent in the forest. Come back. I will embrace your computer in the bisected box. You will comb your daughter's hair till the music begins. My guess is I didn't translate even one word correctly in this poem, but it's something I really like to do, is take poems in other languages and try to imagine what they might mean in English. Especially taking poems where I can't even read the alphabet, like Greek or Sanskrit, or in this case, some Chinese alphabet. Here's a poem called Guide to Better Living 1. It's called 1 because there's a series of them. There's 2 or 3 poems that are part of this Guide to Better Living. And it's also a very specific kind of poem. It's called a list poem. And it's called a list poem because every line begins, or every sentence begins with the same word or phrase. So, because this is Guide to Better Living 1, this is a poem of advice. Never nail a bathrobe to a train. Never tap impatiently on a window when it's raining blood. Never name a tomcat prince Vanilla. Never store marbles in your ears. Never crawl silently through the halls of an elementary school in the middle of the night. Never cross your fingers in the mud. Never fill your head with good ideas or anyone else's head. Never testify against your stapler. Never ask a barber to open a bottle of wine. Never place your open palm against the open palm that I have designated as mine. Another poem where I was just doing a little bit of experimenting is this one. It's called Crunch. And what I decided to do was see what would happen if I tried to write a poem that only used one verb. I don't even use the verb to be, like is or are. I only use one verb, and that verb is to crunch. And it's a bit of a winter poem, so I thought it might be appropriate for today. Crunch. I crunched myself into a chair while he crunched numbers in his office, and the family with the toe-headed boy crunched on rotten sunflower seeds. Boots crunched on the snow outside the door, face crunching against the frost-covered window. In a deserted jail cell, a cockroach crunched on an aphid, the way you crunch on a pomegranate seed, or a pomegranate seed crunches on you. By next Thursday, we will have crunched the ugly clouds into wisps of tissue that crunch slowly into winter. I'm just going to read 2 or 3 more poems. I love the Kootenays. And because I love the Kootenays, I love driving along Highway 6 because who knows what amazing places it'll take you to. You turn a corner and all of a sudden the landscape completely changes. It's such a magical place. This is called Highway 6 Revisited. Francis, the butcher from the Overweighty in downtown Nakusp, woke this morning after dreaming of enormous shoulders of beef and flocks of chicken livers, forgiving him, embracing him, inviting him for an evening of 10-pin bowling in Kelowna. Now he stands at the edge of Summit Lake and watches the coffins slide in from the mountain opposite, one by one, bobbing amid shards of melting ice. Whenever he thinks of thaw, he becomes happy. He places a party hat on his noggin, then dances down Highway 6. It is dusk. The deer hide among the trees, clutching their cameras. I'm trying to remember back to when I wrote that poem, and I don't really remember too much, but I think I really loved the idea of the deer being the ones with the cameras taking pictures of humans rather than the other way around. And I would say that poem falls under the category of sort of a surrealist poem. It sounds very much like a dream. That image of coffins sliding down the side of mountains into the water is sort of real kind of dream imagery. And to finish off these readings for the day, because I'm really cold, because although it looks like I'm in a structure, I'm completely outside. There are no walls. This is this little sort of long rectangular gazebo they've got set up in Victoria Park, and every Christmas they give out hot chocolate on this very special night. But you're not really supposed to sit here on the picnic benches when it's 7 degrees below Celsius. The last poem I'm going to read to you is maybe one of the strangest ones I've read to you today. I'm going to read you, it's just the first part of the title poem of this book, You Exist, Details Follow. And I wrote this poem under strange circumstances. I was in a room full of other poets, and we passed around a very long poem by an American poet named John Ashbery. And everyone took turns reading from John Ashbery's poetry. And when you weren't reading, you would write. And the rule I gave was that you could steal as much as you wanted from John Ashbery's work. So the poem has a different sound from a lot of my other poems, and I like to think of it as a kind of, well, sort of the poetry equivalent of abstract art. You know, those crazy canvases where you just see color splattered all over the place. Maybe it's a huge canvas 20 feet high, and there's red there and blue there, and splatters and streaks, and maybe even pieces of newspaper pasted onto it. So I think there can be poems that are sort of the equivalent of those kinds of pieces of art. Maybe this is one of those poems. So I'm just going to read the first section of You Exist. Details follow. Honestly, citizens, have you heard of time? It's a thing that matters, like that other thing, but less. Someone in the diner said, "Thither." Someone else strutted into the corner, admired the landscape and unfocused golf course. Please write a thesis about my behavior. My grandmother. If we all shared a single torso, I would feel more confident dancing. Have you noticed the sky? It's on top of the trees. The straggling professors of trouble are astonished by the headlines. They don't know who to phone. They await further orders from a double-parked sun. Soon all will be rubble, heaps of slag. See, I have a topic. I will tell you my topic when I'm better prepared. Thanks a lot for spending this time with me today, and I hope you enjoyed some of my poems. Good luck with your own writing.